All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this little cozy panel. I have three Jameses with me, so that may be confusing at some point. Bear with us.
Good name.
But to start things off, I thought we'd do a bit of a little introduction, and I'll leave it to you all to introduce yourselves, because I think that's the best way to do it.
Hi, everyone. My name's James Vaughan. I'm the creator of a game called Plague Inc. and Rebel Inc. So we've got 130 million players now over the last 7 or 8 years. Premium, intelligent strategy games, effectively. I've been quite lucky with how it's all worked out. And community has been a real key reason for why I'm even in front of you today. So it's quite good to be on this panel. I think it's a key reason for our success so far.
Hi everyone, I am James Binns, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Network N. We're a games media business. We do a few things. We run a bunch of brands, we run an advertising network, and we're an agency. I'm sort of qualified to be here because we have a bunch of social communities. We own the biggest League of Legends Facebook page in the world, for example, and we do a bunch of work helping brands with their community. People like the UK retailer Game, where we do all their social media, brands like HP, and a bunch of others I'll come to.
I'm clearly unqualified to be here because I'm not James. I'll be James for today. I think I'm here because I've been doing this for 22 years and old enough to remember doing communities on dial-up modems. Seriously, we ran communities on dial-up modems in 1998. Yeah, I'm that old. In fact, it's literally my 51st birthday today. Yeah.
Happy birthday.
The other thing I'd say is I happen to also work on a thing called PlayStation Home, which I always talk about and he always tells me off for talking about. But it was a really fascinating experience working out what virtual communities look like on console.
Hello, I'm the third James. You can call me JD if you like, if that's easier. I'm the head of community and social at Jagex. Jagex have been sort of the forefront of MMO gaming for about 19 years now. I've been at the company for nearly 6, and I've been within the community management team for the entirety of that time. So we've seen some things, we've done some things, and hopefully I'll tell you about some of those things in the next 40 minutes.
Excellent. And a little brief introduction about myself. I'm Haley, and I work at Mediatonic Games. So you may know us from Hatoful Boyfriend, or Fall Guys, or Gears Pop. We pretty much do everything but VR. But today I have the easy job of asking them the questions. So I'll just start in. And I guess we've probably always seen this when we interact with developers who aren't normally accustomed to doing marketing for themselves. The first question I always get is, where do you even start when you're trying to engage your community? What is that first step somebody can take?
Okay, I think to be honest, it's establishing those communication frameworks within the game itself. I think if you can build those and bake those into the infrastructure of your game, then you're onto a winner really, because then you get your community communicating anyway. That if they communicate with each other, then you can interpolate that data or interpolate that chat, work out what it is that pushes their buttons, and then you can engage them on those topics. We have chat systems, things like that within RuneScape, and we find it really interesting, the kind of conversations that go on between our community, things that we never thought would happen. Actually, ironically, in-game is one of the areas in which we struggle to communicate with our players the most, which is really, really weird, but actually is not that uncommon within the gaming sector. So if you can kind of in-bake those communications platforms within the framework of your game, I think you're onto a really good start there, and kind of you get that community then being social with each other, which then, if you, as the developer, then start to engage in that conversation, then you can start to understand a little bit more about them.
Do you have a way of categorizing the communications that are going across between players? I mean, I'm assuming it's not just you reading millions of lines of them. Do you
in-game
get data from it?
Yeah, in-game we have sort of proprietary tools, things like that, to be able to analyse and work out whether something's being talked about in a positive way or a negative way. It's a little bit rudimentary, but we found that it does give some quite interesting insights. And obviously then you've got community outside of the game itself, so Discord servers, Reddit, subreddits, all that kind of stuff.
I think the thing is, my immediate reaction is normally you're starting too late, or it's like the default thing. Whenever I meet a developer, they're almost basically starting too late. But the other thing is that the community is happening despite them. Even if they haven't started it, it is happening. It's just you don't know where it is yet. And actually, most of the time, it's just aligning those two kind of ways of looking at it. And like you said, in-game, so that the ability to create predictable, repeatable, structures that are desirable, that are anticipatory, is one part. But also just realizing that it's not your game, it's theirs, it's your audience's game, is the other biggest struggle I have. Just getting them to stop thinking about how important their view of the game is. And frankly, data is the best thing because it scares the bejesus out of people.
No. If you're starting from scratch and you're sort of saying where do you begin, there's Kevin Kelly essay about superfans you should all read. Google it. And a big part of this is you're not trying to create 3 million followers who want daily updates about your game. You're trying to create a small community of superfans that will help you develop the product, give you help share the stories, help stick up for you when people are moaning at you, be the first 100 reviews on Steam or a reviews platform. So I think chasing a vanity metric is one of the things that will trip you up because we sometimes talk to clients who are sort of saying we want to grow our Facebook follow account. And we say, well, why? What is your actual goal of growing that? Are you trying to pollute the group with loads of people who don't really care about the game? Do you need a number so you can impress some imaginary investor? Really, you can have a group of people who love the game and pay for the rest to reach if you want.
And I think it's don't take the community when it's growing for granted. Somebody who sends in a long email saying how awful your game is, there's still passion there. They've still spent time writing all these thoughts in there. And actually, most games will never get anybody to send long, nasty emails at all because they'll have just disappeared into nothingness. So I think it's taking even those passionate but pointing the wrong way people and try and convert them round, and they can be just as much a super fan as anyone else can be.
I've got a great anecdote on that one. Again, back in '99, I think this was, a 14-year-old kid hacked Wireplay's email servers. So BT security turned up at his door. Literally, at that time I could send effectively the BT version of police to his door. The kid's mum is horrified. The kid is going, please don't put me in prison. And we later hired him as a community manager. He was the best community manager we ever had. It was astounding. So he did it because he was a 14-year-old kid. He was experimenting. He loved the platform. And instead of putting him away and finding or whatever his family, actually harnessing that so it became, he was literally just amazing. This super fan thing is absolutely the case. It's really just joyful.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned one of the first steps is finding where that community exists already. So how should we go about trying to find those spaces? And have you found any particular spaces that have worked best for you so far?
I'll make something up first. I think we came, when it was just me initially, came from very much a sort of an indie area where it was emails coming in from people, it was people talking on forums, and so I was really just doing a Google of wherever people were sort of saying anything about Plague Inc. in the last 24 hours, and then sort of going in there, interacting with them, and that kind of was just sowing the initial seeds, tracking through a whole load of emails, making sure they were responding to it. I had to, because we were non-existent in terms of awareness, we had to go to them rather than try and sort of put a little garden, make a little garden for them and leave them to it.
I think do both, yeah. I think it's okay to have a little garden. If you've got a Twitter account with 100 followers, there's no shame in it. But it's when you're looking at the Twitter analytics each day thinking it's going to have a material impact on the sales, what you're really creating is a little bit of proof for yourself as you start to develop. There's loads of places community will gather, of course. There's sort of Reddit and Discord. There's an alchemy of the developer talking to these communities in those channels, rocking up and saying, hello, I'm the developer here. Do you want to talk about this thing if someone's moaning? But a word of caution, if you are looking to see communities, be really careful trying to start things on Reddit or pretend to be something you're not.
Yeah, I mean, that authenticity is kind of core of it. I can talk about some things recently I've done that didn't work, and why they didn't work is interesting. So I was trying to work to create an AR-based location game around the game, the books Lone Wolf. Now, obviously, it's AR. okay, going to be limited audience. It's a 1980s choose your own adventure book series. It's going to have a limited audience, but the client insisted they wanted to do a Kickstarter. So one does what the client wants. And the struggle to get enough people, the fans who loved it were brilliant, amazing. And there were some people who were doing their own content. There were vast groups of people who just wanted to tell everybody that you possibly could. But no matter how far you stretch your efforts, you can't scale that. Because not everybody understands it. Not everybody has the history. So I suppose the message I'm trying to get across is you've got to choose the fights you can win. You've got to be able to find audiences where they are. You can't take that audience somewhere they're not. And, so understanding if you find players, where they are, and then how do you build your communication method so that you're making the best of where they already are, and then bring that to scale.
Cool, thanks. I think there's something to be said as well for whether you create that community or whether you create that infrastructure on that platform to communicate with your players, or you let your players do it for you. We have found real success with Reddit because our players and our player moderators run that subreddit, and it gives players kind of a vessel for freedom, perhaps that they wouldn't have had if it were a Jagex moderated place that they could talk. So I think having that kind of area where players can almost, not completely unfiltered obviously, but they can kind of have that unfiltered feedback is really, really valuable. But it's a question of when you go in and when you feel like you need to engage on something, and it can be a little bit softly catchy monkey sometimes. You can feel like you are sort of intruding on somebody else's party, but sometimes it is necessary. We have multiple occasions where things potentially might have spiraled out of control for a community issue, but we've had to jump in and address misconceptions or sort of talk people down, so to speak. So there are communities all over the place. I think you have to make a judgment call on whether you're a lurker or whether you're an active engager on that platform. And generally, the community will let you know if you overstep your marks. So,
speaking to Oscar's point about scaling communities, one of the ways unfortunately you have to do it is with money. You can ask how many people have got a Facebook page for their game. Thumbs up quickly. How many of you attached the Facebook page to an ads account? Not so a few, not so many. So really, the weird thing is, if you have a physics-based block, if you have a block-based game, Minecraft, you can build a certain amount of followers for your game. But Facebook, for example, is really good at helping you understand people that may have an affinity for your game and using the channels to then reach a wider audience with it. And expecting people to follow your thing versus using Facebook ad platforms and other platforms as well to be able to curate the kind of people you may want to show the stories to if you're using the community for marketing. It's a very small leap, and small amounts of money go a really long way with the platform.
Doesn't that tap into your point about authenticity, though? Because if you are truly an authentic fan of the game, the genre, whatever it is, you'd be engaging with the other communities around it naturally anyway. And it sounds like, if I've understood what the mechanism you're talking about, it's an automated way of doing what we get community managers to do anyway.
No, I think the challenge that you have extending communities is that Facebook is mean and greedy and is fairly keen on reducing the virality of your content unless you cough up. And if you're RuneScape, James, there's a group of people who are very keen to learn more about RuneScape. But if you're block game 12, it's not quite as easy. So the idea that it's almost like the pay-per-play of the App Store or Xbox Discovery or PlayStation Discovery, the idea that there has to be some investment in trying to reach the audiences you want to find. Sad but true.
One thing back on the Reddit, I wish I'd set up our own Reddit for Plague Inc. because we now have two competing subreddits where the moderators of the one Reddit that they set up fell out, and so now there are two of them, and I tried to make them unify again and they didn't want to, and so sometimes it can be worth it. Because with Rebel Inc. I made it and then I found some people in the community and have chucked it towards them and hopefully never having to touch it again, but at least if they do go rogue I can have a bit more control over it.
You should gamify that shit, make them fight.
Yeah. Which is the best subreddit disease? Reddit now, yeah.
That sounds both terrifying and fun. So, now we've got them in their spaces. We know where they are. We've started talking to these players. Do you have any tips on how to engage people at different levels to keep them invested?
Frequency of contact, but that doesn't mean that probably once a day. If you are, for example, if you spam into your social channels loads of posts, people don't have time to see them for the next one. It sounds very obvious, but people thinking they have to post 5 times a day versus one good one. Be entertaining in your content. Make people feel they're part of the journey and invested in the product roadmap. Respond to comments if they come through quickly. One of the things for virality in social platforms is how responsive you are. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's about understanding what kinds of players you have communicating on those platforms as well, so you can tailor messaging or tailor your approach on those particular platforms. For instance, with us, we know that our Twitter account has tons and tons of really, really hyper-engaged players who really don't care about if we are talking about something at a very marketing-y level, because they already know about it. They already know all of the details about it. So we tend to be more broadcasty on Twitter to our kind of hyper-engaged players who want that information first. Whereas with Facebook, we have quite a lot of lapsed users who perhaps don't get that information quite as often. So we can tailor that messaging slightly more towards the, hey, have you heard about X, Y, Z? Come and play it now. Here's the reasons why you should be playing it. And that's kind of, I think, how we approach it. We identify what the not demographics, but the reasons why people follow us on those platforms, and then we tailor our messaging accordingly.
That's all great. I mean, I suppose the only thing I'd add to that is I think looking at players from the point of view of their life cycle and what they want at different stages of that life cycle is very useful. It doesn't necessarily change the sort of broader messaging, but it does mean that you're paying attention to what they need. So it might be certain types of players need to feel that they're part of an ongoing lore that your game is around, and they want to see kind of the ability to be able to have conversations about that are not triggered by you, that they're kind of like secondary out of that lore. That's kind of a powerful way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is just creating anticipation, understanding what intrinsically they value, and if you layer these sort of like the fear of missing out, the anticipation, the desire, and the kind of really understanding what they really care about, then we can create kind of a narrative arc of messaging that can be done in a simple, clean, regular, predictable way that has a cadence that matches what they're after, what rewards them. And I think being audience front center, directly focused on their value, all this other stuff comes out of that, I think.
Yeah, sorry, there was one more thing that I wanted to mention that I completely forgot to talk about, and it is kind of related. So we identified that we're obviously a UK-based company. We have primary activity within the office is sort of 8 till 7-ish, something like that, through different people. We identified that when people were coming to our Facebook page, they were quite often bouncing off because they either needed support or they needed something that we weren't able to give them within the kind of the working hours and the levels of engagement that we were able to offer at that point. So we thought, well, what can we do to mitigate that? And there's a lot of movement towards Facebook bots at this point. And that it's not the ideal solution. You'd always rather have an individual talking to an individual, but we've inputted this bot into our Facebook page, so people overnight, if they come onto our page, they get directed to the right area of the support centre. They can help get onboarded with new bits of content that they might have otherwise missed. And it was a real opportunity kind of that we tried to grasp with both hands, and we've seen something like 57,000 people engage with it since it's been launched in around June time. So it has fulfilled a need that we identified, and to say it's a slightly different way of engaging with the community. It can be quite scary, but sometimes you kind of have to take that jump.
I'll tell you 2 things you should never do. Never put a YouTube video on another channel. So if you put the YouTube video on a Facebook page, no one will see it. You have to upload video natively to channels. Schoolboy error, everyone does it. One of our favourite things when we are retained by clients is to look at their social media. And generally their last 12 tweets were Servers up, servers down, servers up, servers down, servers up, servers down. If you do a piece of messaging that is dull about your game, make sure very quickly you follow up with something that is interesting, and make sure your most pinned tweet is within this calendar year at least. If you want to look like a dead game, servers up, servers down, a pinned tweet from 2017. That's how you win.
Yeah, that's definitely rough. So we touched a little bit on this where you were cautioning people to be a little bit careful about being authentic or about issues that may have arisen. Definitely, I imagine one of the fears for any developers not used to engaging with their communities is what happens when things go wrong. So I was wondering if you had any ways to encourage positive, healthy behavior, or if you've really turned an event around in your favor when things did go wrong.
I mean, I think I never give a deadline for when something's going to be out until it is. I'm ready to press the button. It's coming soon, really coming soon, but never ever give an actual date. There's no benefit to it, and it just puts a load of pressure and stress on the team. And I think that's the big one for us. And I think we try not to. We try not to ignore people. If somebody's ranting and raving, we'll still try and communicate with them. We'll try and get them onto email rather than Twitter, so it's a bit less public. But I think the times when we've decided this person's so toxic, we're just going to ignore them, they seem to just keep on festering away and doing nasty things. Whereas if we can get them onto email, we've got a slightly higher chance of showing them we're a normal person talking to them rather than some faithless machine.
Somebody else go. I'm trying to think.
And I think that getting onto another medium is a really important thing. So obviously, PlayStation Home had a really interesting audience, but we had death threats, most in the US team. And I would tell you, these were taken very, very seriously, by the way. I mean, fortunately, nothing happened, but we had to get extra security, particularly for a couple of people in the team, the person who was running community management in the US, and also the guy who headed up the US team. And this was like really serious, FBI involved, all this kind of stuff. So these things do happen. Unfortunately, nothing happened. It was all fine. It was somebody who, in the end, got on email, and it was all dealt with. He was just being angry about something completely unrelated and took it out on the community, and particularly community management of Home. That happens. But you've got to prepare for that. And another thing that fortunately never happened goes back to PlayStation. Wireplay. Back in that far, we had a system in place with the Metropolitan Police Authority, because it was this is an era before Facebook, before Ajax, before all the mechanisms of the web now. Obviously, people could create their own web pages and put their own content up, and that could include anything. So if you are a community manager and you come across material which is illegal, I, as your boss, has to protect you. So we had a system where we had a single point of contact who would go in and be able to deal with that, basically putting the material on a memory card. Then they would walk away from the machine. And then the police would come and they would take the material and take it away. Now, unfortunately, this didn't happen. But what always happens is if you don't prepare for it, you get completely destroyed. So really think about what are the genuine worst things that could happen. Now, what really goes wrong is this. You have a Little Big Planet whiteboard, and people draw penises. Anyone heard the phrase TTP? In fact, if you're in this room and you don't know what TTP is, you should. It's called time to penis. It is the very first thing anyone ever does, given any opportunity, and any community management thing. People have done it with Farmville. Seriously. They've done it with any game that has any ability to lay things down. So expect it, because they will do it.
I'll add a new mnemonic, TTA, time to ass. It was when they launched the first Xbox cameras. You could play a game of Uno with your camera and play against a stranger and have a camera on. And within minutes, you had to switch off the servers. It was a hoot. One thing you can do to get ahead of this also is, as your development team expands, if you say you've got 20 people in a team, you can be pretty sure that one of them's an idiot. One of them has alt-right beliefs or has a history of monstrous comments against women on Twitter or something like that. It's hard to control for that. And if they're a great technical artist, maybe you'll sort of tolerate, I don't know. But actually you have to work out who it is that has the game name in their Twitter bio and who it is that can talk about the game. You want to do that well ahead of time, because if you have someone on your team that's a cretin, eventually it will haunt you. And if they claim to be a spokesperson for the game and they're not electric in their views, and you didn't get ahead of it, you're getting alive. There was a moment with Subnautica where one of their artists got in a spot of bother. And I think we have a broad spectrum of people involved in game production, like all levels of society, but not all of them have to be your spokespeople. Time to ass.
Could not agree more. I say I look after our staff on social program, so I know exactly what you're talking about. We have like 175 of our staff on social, which is sometimes an absolute nightmare, but sometimes, again, it's whether it's weighing up the potential risks versus the potential reward. And the reward is that you get an authentic human voice, you get a frontline sort of communication point with your players, and they can have a frontline communication with your developers.
In non-business hours as well.
In non-business hours,
yeah. If
yeah.
they're passionate about it, they'll be talking about it.
Absolutely. And one of our staff is probably the best exponent of social that I have seen working for a company. He's got about 80,000 followers and is just phenomenally brilliant at responding to everything. We don't expect that from everybody. Sorry? Yeah. But no, he's it does give you so much opportunity that people responding to corporate accounts, because it's a faceless account, will generally be more negative because they don't feel like they're going to face any consequences. If they realise they're talking to real people with real feelings and real kind of aspirations, then actually you tend to find it's tempered a little bit, but obviously you do have to put in place things like resilience training and onboarding staff, and so they understand the risks and what kind of things they might come across as well.
The risk reward varies based on the size of the studio as well. If you're a tiny indie company who nobody's going to talk about, probably actually you can give people a bit more slack, because any press is going to, well, not any press, but still having people write about you at all is going to be better than not, as long as it's not too awful. Whereas if you're a large company, you don't want to take the risk because people are going to find out about your game anyway. So I think, small companies, let everyone, hopefully you know everyone, you're a small team, and you can let the passion, the realness of the people show in a way that you can't risk it with a large company.
It kind of goes both ways, though, because, so, for example, I was given free rein to talk in a certain game engine. I won't say who it was. Anyone who knows me will know what I'm talking about. I made a slightly disparaging remark about the business strategies of a particular Japanese company, and I was somewhat castigated over that process. The fact that then the next day every magazine article said exactly the same thing I had said makes me feel justified personally, but I actually have to admit I had a responsibility because I was seen as representing that company. So when you are that person, you have to be authentic, but at the same time, you have to be very careful about the tightrope walk. If I had said that Japanese company had done the right thing, I would have lost credibility. So if I did not say something, I would have lost credibility. But the act of saying something meant that I put the relationship between my employer at the time and that company at some threat. So that's a really, really difficult thing to balance.
And the phrase "views are my own" doesn't mean anything. It's like putting allegedly in front of a libel and thinking it will be okay. And if you think allegedly in front of a libel is okay because you watch Have I Got News For You, it's not. Don't say allegedly. If you say the thing, it won't work.
Wise words on many accounts for that one. Jumping a little bit, because I think this is one of our most interesting questions, so I want to make sure we cover it. Obviously, there's plenty of stuff that happens in-game that you push out towards your community, but have you ever used real-world events, whether inside or outside of games, to engage your community?
My one, isn't it? So I think certainly with Plague Inc. and Rebel Inc., it's based on real-world stuff, and that gives it makes it annoying during development because you've got to do justice to the reality of the situation, but it also gives a number of opportunities that other games don't have in terms of responding to real-world events. So one that happened for us last year, which was quite a successful community engagement piece, was there was an anti-vaxxers. Somebody set up a petition asking for anti-vaxxers to be put into Plague Inc. And so we said that and said, yeah, sure, fine, get to 20,000 people. I should have said a higher number, but anyway, so 20,000 people, and we'll put it into game. And one little tweet responding to something a player had put up, and suddenly we got a whole round of press attention on that. It's still being talked about now in social channels. It gets popped up on Reddit every now and again. That was just a great way that we could, with very, very easily, interact with a real-world story. It also gives us opportunities when the CDC asked me to go and talk to them about the models in Plague Inc. I mean, that was phenomenal marketing potential. It's an interesting thing superfans can say to their non-superfan friends. Oh, that game, they went to the CDC. It was a really powerful way for us to latch onto something real. There are also downsides to it. So when people were very worried about Ebola a couple of years ago, we saw big spikes in sales all around the world, and that was a less nice thing, because we like our games to do well because we're making great games, not because people are really suffering around it. So there we needed to find a way to not be appearing to exploit a serious situation. So there we did an Ebola is not a game campaign with our community, where we sort of did a crowdfunding donations across the world for various Ebola charities. We raised, I think, $70,000 or something through it. So, and even that was that turned. We had the Daily Mail got in touch to write a story before we announced this thing, and that you think, oh God, there's going to be some awful story about how we're exploiting these people. And actually, that was a good way for us to kind of make sure that we stuck true to our values of this is a serious thing. You should understand about it, be informed about it, and here's how you can help. And worked out quite well for us. There's lots of other examples. Whenever there's a flu season in Japan, we see a sales spike.
I should just point out, a friend of mine is, well, we joke that she's the woman who's going to get called if there's a zombie apocalypse, and she's a massive fan of, seriously massive fan.
I'll give a chastening tale because it's much more fun. We worked with a brand that wanted to do a bunch of stuff around Black Friday. So we made a load of creatives for them with the theme breaking news. And we told them not to. We said that making things that look a bit like news broadcasts, where the breaking news is you can buy this game a bit cheaper, may have been an error. And we went live with the campaign, and there was some breaking news. And it was suboptimal. So we had to pause the campaign, throw away all the creatives on Friday evening, and reset everything. So in a way, we were newsjacked rather than trying to newsjack. So if you try and make something that looks a bit like news, say it's a video of an exploding building, you want to think very carefully about that when you put that out, because you may get caught out.
We've got, I'm going to say, a sad story that ended up meaning that we had some really emotive content. So a couple of years ago, the lead singer of Linkin Park died. And a lot of our staff are big Linkin Park fans. Have grown up listening to their albums, and one of our devs felt so passionately about it. They put a little Easter egg in game with something like where you can inspect an item and it's like a little wisp. It's like it flickers, which is a lyric from a Linkin Park song, and. Our community picked up on this. It wasn't something that we really shouted about that much, but they got in contact with Mike Shinoda, who is the other singer from Linkin Park, and he said, he put it out on his social channel and said, this is amazing, this is a fantastic tribute. It's the first kind of thing that we've seen that would that's kind of memorialised Chester, and it got a load of coverage, and that's just because one dev did something that I don't think it even went through the proper approval process. Yeah, and it was authentic, and I think if it had gone through the proper approval process, it might not have gone in, but it was something that was done off the cuff, and because everybody could tell how much it meant to that individual to put it in, it ended up sort of being a really nice tribute that went a little bit viral.
We actually had this happen in Wireplay in '98, where there's a game called Air Attack, and basically one of the guys who was a regular player died, and they basically decided to create a map with a tombstone with his name on, and did a fly past, all community driven, all done by the community. And at the time, the chance of getting 30 people in a single server was high, but they had 150 people. Now, this is nothing in modern age. But imagine having 150 people on a dial-up modem trying to fly past a tombstone. We end up in the Times and various other things, the Times of all newspapers. But we'll go back to the question. What I found really problematic is doing real-world time events is mostly scuppered because there's just too much organisation to do. My favourite example of that was Red Nose Day in PlayStation Home. So I managed to do a deal where we could actually have the red nose as an item. Actually, maybe Dan Hill that did the actual deal. I can't remember who did the deal. Anyway, we got this deal, red nose, on your character, fantastic. Then the Comic Relief guys realised that it would be available in America. Comic Relief in America is not Comic Relief UK. And they don't get on. We had to pull months of work because we couldn't get America to even accept other people from the UK walking around a space with a red nose on. So anything can scupper all the best intentions, but if you can find it, if the stars align and get a real date, it can be magical.
Yeah, I think those kind of small scale or semi-reactive things, I think, tend to work better than anything that's too orchestrated. I think orchestrated means that it feels contrived, and if it doesn't necessarily fit within the realms of your game, then community are going to spot it a mile off.
I mean, we share a lot of real-world stuff in our social channels anyway, and I think our rough rule of thumb is if it's talking about an individual story of suffering or something, we don't touch it. Like, we want Plague Inc. It's a horrible game, Plague Inc., but it's a game that focuses very much on a macro scale. We're looking at billions of people, not on individual. I think really that's, as a rule of thumb, that works quite well for us. If it's about a person, a single person or a group of people, don't go near it, because it's too personal to somebody somewhere. We don't really want to go close to that.
I think, James, when you were telling the story about Linkin Park, I thought it was going to have a sad ending. I thought you were going to get eaten alive for kind of newsjacking or trying to capitalise on the death of someone. I'm glad it ended that way, though. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the easiest routes is to celebrate good news. You know, like if you were making a space game, today would have been a great day to share about the SpaceX test. And you could have put that on your account and retweeted that and gone, yay, rockets exploding. You know, I think the idea that if you can know the event has happened and not try and newsjack or put your spin on it, but just go, oh, there's a thing. I think that's okay. You know, and even like, I'm amazed that space games don't celebrate the new Star Wars film. You know, you can share that and get on that without paying any royalties and be part of the buzz off the Mandalorian or Baby Yoda or whatever you want. And I think there's ways to do it that are remorselessly cheerful.
Absolutely. I know one of our community managers shared a Baby Yoda picture for our Murder by Numbers game. It's not a space game. They were just very happy to share that. So it definitely happens. Do we have time for some questions? 2 minutes. So raise your hands fast. Ooh, a hand.
Well, patience is the first thing. Have you got time for it? The second one is, frankly, can you spend a bit of money? I mean, unfortunately, that's what it's going to have to come down to a lot of extent. But I think authenticity is it. And the trouble with authenticity is it takes time. You know, and as much as you have to be authentic, when you spend, you've even got to be authentic in the way you spend. So if you know, I mean, I personally love the way I can target Facebook ads so beautifully. I almost feel like I kind of a shield for them, but I'm not. It's just if I can find people who will like this thing, and I can talk to those people about this thing authentically and say, come here, here's a reason to be here, here's anticipation, here's fear of missing out, and there's something happening. That's the only way I can see. But it's like herding, juggling jelly.
And capitalise on success. You know, audiences will cluster in places, and if they've chosen to cluster there, make that the main place you talk to them. Because you're mad about Twitter, if all your fans happen to be on Facebook, going, no, really they should be on Twitter because I like Twitter. I think the idea that we park our own ideas. Apparently, there's people on Toctic, which I don't understand. There's these other places where people are, but if people are already choosing to cluster, go with it, because you can force and pay for. You know, if you've got 1,000 YouTube followers and you want 100,000 views on a YouTube video for a vanity metric and show a bit of success, you can just buy them for not very much money. But if you want to pick a main channel you talk to your people, I think that's okay as well.
Yeah, it's about scaling it as well. So if you found that a large proportion of your community congregate on Reddit, then be where your community are, but also understand what your limitations are. It's better to be communicative really, really well on one platform than spreading that across 6 or 7 and not really doing a very good job on any of them. So make sure that, as I say, if you're going to jump into those kinds of communities, that you can afford to do it on a regular basis, because that's what they'll come to expect from you.
One thing on it, you'll find that even massive brands, if you look at Rockstar, there'll be one channel that's got loads more followers for Red Dead on the Red Dead channel than another, and it's okay. And it doesn't really matter that they might have a third the followers on Facebook than on Twitter, for example.
All right, I think that puts us at our time. So thank you for joining us all. I'm sure that these fine fellows wouldn't mind answering a few questions upstairs or outside somewhere. Thank you for joining us.